Introducing Scott Ritter's YouTube channel, a platform dedicated to discussing the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Scott Ritter, an expert in international relations, provides in-depth analysis and commentary on the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. With his extensive knowledge and first-hand experience, Scott Ritter offers unique insights into the historical background, geopolitical complexities, and humanitarian aspects of the conflict. Join his channel to gain a comprehensive understanding of the crisis, including its impact on regional stability and global politics. Through well-researched and balanced content, Scott Ritter's YouTube channel serves as a valuable resource for anyone interested in delving deeper into the Russian-Ukrainian war.
Latest update on NATO expansion is now Finland's in. I think that was announced officially today. Over the last 2 days, there's been reports, Stoltenberg talking about a session, all of that. Finland shares a border with Russia. Sweden and Finland have been part of this months-long debate with Turkey, especially standing in the middle of Sweden and NATO for a bit, still kind of holding tight a bit there, but with seems like some opening for Sweden. But Finland, there was never really any issue. It was just a matter of time. Russia, of course, has objected to this, as they've objected to NATO expansion since the beginning for many, many years, well before the special military operation. And predictably, NATO and the United States have acted like this is just par for the course. This is just how you normally react to Russian aggression. What's your take on the accession of Finland into NATO, its new membership? Where are we going here? It doesn't seem good. Doesn't seem like good places when it comes to a bigger NATO.
Well, first of all, we need to understand that this is the most recent expansion of the not 1 inch eastward policy that was adopted by NATO back when the Cold War ended. Guarantees given to Mikhail Gorbachev that NATO had no desire to move eastward, that Russia, the Soviet Union didn't need to fear this. And now here we are, over 2 decades later, and 3 decades, and we have NATO all the way up to the Russian border. The Baltic states are part of NATO. Ukraine wanted to be part of NATO. That's why the Russians are fighting this war right now. Then there's Finland and Sweden, two longtime neutral parties. They have, especially the Swedes, trained in an interoperable fashion with the West, but they weren't part of the alliance, and they didn't have a need to be part of the alliance, and Russia didn't view them as part of the alliance, and therefore Russian military capabilities along the Finnish border were the minimum necessary to safeguard St. Petersburg, the Kaliningrad enclave, and things of that nature. Now Finland has joined NATO, and Vladimir Putin has said that you're a sovereign state, you can do what you want, but this changes everything. We no longer view you as a neutral entity. You're not a neutral party. You're now a hostile nation, an unfriendly nation. You're joining an alliance that is engaged in trying to achieve the strategic defeat of Russia, which, if you think about it, means you're trying to kill yourself, because Russia has nuclear weapons, which will be released if the existential survival of Russia is ever put at risk. And the idea that NATO can somehow empower Ukraine to recapture Crimea, recapture Kherson, Zaporizhia, ignores the fact that Russia views these territories as part of Russia, constitutionally speaking. Referendum have been passed, votes have been made, and they've been absorbed in. So anybody who says, no, we support a Ukrainian counteroffensive, we support the drive to the Azov Sea, we want to split this, that, the other, you do understand that you're supporting a death penalty for the world, because Russia cannot allow itself to be defeated, and they will use nuclear weapons to prevent that kind of defeat. So if NATO is facilitating Ukrainian military action of a significant scope and scale to threaten the survival of Russia, then Russia has a duty and responsibility to view NATO is a potentially hostile state. So Finland has now joined an alliance that is openly hostile to Russia. So what they've done now is they have presented themselves as a threat to Russia, and Russia's responding in kind. Part of this expansion that Russia undertook to 1.5 million men from their pre-special military operations strength of around 900,000, 70,000 of those are an army corps that's been created in Karelia to protect St. Petersburg from the Finnish threat or NATO threat, but also threaten Helsinki, threaten some of the most strategically important territory in Finland. And Finland doesn't have an army capable of withstanding this. The Finns have to spend a lot of money to re-up their thing. There's now an 810 mile border. Now, people say, well, that puts Russia at a disadvantage. I'd say, well, no, it actually puts the nation that only has 18,000 regular troops at a disadvantage. And Finland's economy, like all other economies, took a hit from the pandemic, and it takes a hit from Russian energy and the inability to freely access this energy. Where are they going to get the money to do this tremendous military buildup? Are they going to turn their nation into a barracks for NATO? People tend to forget the history of Finland here. 1939, they fought a winter war against the Russians. They lost that in March of 1940 when the Russians broke through the Mannerheim line and confronted the Finns with strategic defeat. They then joined the side of Nazi Germany in 1941, participated in the siege of Leningrad, which killed over 1 million Russians. By the time the siege was lifted, and the Soviets were counterattacking, the Finns wisely opted for peace. They turned on their German ostensible allies, but rather than punishing Finland with an occupation and things of that nature, what Russia said is, you get to live, but you can't be a member of a foreign alliance in perpetuity. That means forever. Because we don't want Finland to once again be used as a jumping off block for a hostile military force that wants to threaten St. Petersburg or Leningrad. With the fall of the Soviet Union, Finland was able to opt out of that in perpetuity standpoint, but they still ostensibly remain neutral. But now they join NATO. Now they have to secure that border. It's going to be a huge problem for Finland and a big problem for Sweden, because I believe now that Finland's in, that Turkey will eventually, Turkey's trying to squeeze the West to get as many concessions as possible from this. And I'm sure there's not only the above the table deals that are taking place, but there's some underneath the table deals taking place between the collective West and Turkey. And I think that Sweden will probably get voted on, sometime before the end of this year, maybe early next year. But Sweden too will be a member of NATO. So now we have the continued expansion of NATO against Russia. But in some ways, if somebody was betting on this making Russia weak, it's had the exact opposite effect. Russia has expanded its military to 1.5 million, new military formations going up against Finland. Russia would have had a hard time justifying these expenses from a political standpoint prior to the special military operation, but because of the concerted effort by the collective West to strategically defeat Russia, we now see the Russian population firmly behind this expansion of the military. And again, if I were the Finns, I think you're going to wake up sometime in the next 5 years when the demands on your defense budget are too great and your society won't take it, and realizing that you're on the wrong side of history. You bet on the wrong horse.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you're familiar, Scott, with the way that Finland and the Nordic countries in that region of Europe are kind of renowned for their social safety net, and NATO is a drain on that as well. It really does have implications, and with that point on Russia, it does make me think about how there are a lot of people in China who, while they may oppose U.S. aggression, they also see it as a credit for and really a spark for how much people have consolidated around and supported and grown their support in their own government, and that's made their society and system stronger. And I see a very similar thing, maybe with different, of course, circumstances and characteristics, happening with Russia. The more that NATO encircles, the more that NATO grows, the more that countries like Finland and Sweden just decide to throw away their futures for NATO. This actually makes support for Russia's government, support for Russia, and the defense of Russia within Russia that much stronger.
No, you're 100% correct. Vladimir Putin. One of the issues we have in the West is that we don't properly define the problem of Russia, and one of the reasons why this happens is we have a class of people I call the Putin whisperers. These are these fake academics. They're not fake. I mean, they have degrees. Michael Wickfall has a degree. He's a professor at Stanford. But they're fake Russia experts. He's not an expert on Russia. He's an American propagandist. Angela Stent at Georgetown is the same thing. She's not an expert on Russia. She's an American propagandist. Fiona Hill, an American propagandist. These are people that have a vision of what Russia should look like. Amazing that Westerners, outsiders, have a vision of what Russia should look like, and they've been in favor of implementing policies to achieve that objective. And that objective is to break Russia up into smaller constituent parts. You see, we're very fearful of the size of Russia, the physical size of Russia, but also what's contained in that landmass. A great deal of the world's resources. And we are nervous that a single nation has access to all these resources because they can not only become self-sustainable in certain critical industries, but they will be able to help others. And in this case, others means China, with the world's largest population, with a modernizing industrial base, modernizing infrastructure. And now you bring China and Russia together in this nexus of economic capacity, and it's an unbeatable force. This is why the Trans-Eurasian Economic Union that's being pushed by the Russians and the Chinese is a serious thing. I don't think the United States has properly defined what's going on in Russia. We don't understand what their strategic objectives are vis-a-vis China. We don't understand what China's strategic objectives are vis-a-vis Russia. Take a look at Vladimir Putin's meeting with Joe Biden in June of 2021. When Joe Biden came out of that without prompting, he turned to the media and said, well, I think Putin should not get close to China, that's a bad thing, that China has ill intent towards them, etc. The president was totally out of touch because you see Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping have had great relations for a long time, friendly relations. I mean, like friends, real friends. These are guys that meet each other for their birthdays. They socialize. They make pancakes together. They make they cook. They have a really good relationship. And how insulting is it then for the United States president to say, I have to educate Putin on China? I'm pretty sure Putin knows more about China than you do, Mr. Biden. I think he's understands the relationship. Putin gave a speech even in the aftermath of the recent visit by Xi Jinping. Putin gave a speech where he said, we have our history with China. I mean, he's not pretending that everything has been roses with China. We had our history, he said. We have our problems, but we are in a situation where we don't have any other choice. And this isn't a bad choice. It's not as though we have to hold our nose on this. This isn't a bad choice. This is a good choice. It requires some changes on our part, but the West has compelled us to make these changes. So we are going to make these changes. Now we have this relationship that is stronger than any alliance. And I know a lot of people in the West roll their eyes when they hear that it's just Russian propaganda. Well, if you take a look at the NATO Charter, for instance, people like to talk about the strength of the NATO Charter. But the NATO Charter is far more restrictive than it is expansive, meaning that once you join NATO, a lot of controls come down on you because it's a negotiated agreement on a consensus basis. It means you've subordinated a lot of your sovereignty to the totality of an alliance that in some instances is deeply divided. Now we take Russia, China. There's no treaty, none whatsoever. So when people say, well, what are the limitations on it? There are no limitations. They can go anywhere they want it to go, or nothing can happen. And it doesn't change the impact. They still are friendly nations. This allows for a very pragmatic approach. To give you an example of this pragmatism, recently, Russia had signed some concessions with Vietnam, the Republic of Vietnam, for oil exploration in the vicinity of the South China Sea in waters that are contested with China. And Russia has been, actively drilling. They have their rigs there. They're drilling it for joint exploitation. And recently, a Chinese naval vessel came and sailed through there, and one of their, an act of intimidation, I guess, against the Vietnamese. There were people that were shouting, because this happened right after Xi Jinping returned back to China. And people were shouting, saying, oh, look, this is proof that China doesn't take Russia seriously. This is garbage relationship. They lied. There's tensions there. And I asked a senior Russian official about this, a former diplomat who, old China hand, Maria Zakharova's father, by the way, used to be a diplomat in Beijing for many years. And he said, look, Russia's always been pragmatic about, these things. Russia's not taking sides. Russia is doing what it does and will continue to do that. And in some instances, this may cause problems with the Chinese, but the nature of the relationship between Russia and China is that because there is no treaty constraints or treaty that defines things, Russia can be pragmatic about what's going on in these oil fields, but still reach out to the Chinese about gas deals and other deals to bring in Belts and Roads Initiative, to ask Xi Jinping to make a phone call on behalf of a potential peace. Why? Because there are no limitations to this relationship. This relationship can go in any direction whatsoever. Imagine that. Imagine the maturity of your approach towards interacting with other nations, where it wasn't a zero-sum game where you had to win, or because if you didn't win, then it was a loss. What if you actually just sat down and respected everything and treated each thing separately? You didn't have some all-encompassing manifest destiny type plan that said America must rule the world through a rules-based international order, but instead you said, we'll take each thing, one at a time and treat it the way it deserves to be treated, with the respect, but we don't allow this to actually, dictate this outcome. Where would we be today if that was the approach we took? I would hasten to believe that we would be far more deeply entrenched in the Middle East, because nations would want us to be there. But when we decide that our task is to illegally occupy a third of Syria to steal oil to finance a terrorist organization that fights against an ostensible NATO ally, think of what I just said there, the complexity of that. Then, because that's what we do. That's what America does. But had we not done this, where could we be? We could be in there, a player, still able to ask our friends to manipulate the oil market to our economic benefit, because we're friends, we're friendly. There's no reason to fear us. But now nobody saw. I mean, Mohammed bin Salman just came out and said, I don't care what Joe Biden thinks about me anymore. I'm done with him. I'm done with American opinion. Saudi Arabia has divorced itself from the United States orbit. And, this is a game-changing event.
Yeah, the world is certainly changing, and NATO expansion is definitely at the heart of it. And the expansion of this chaos and destruction that you speak of, the way the U.S. relates to the world, is helping to lay a foundation for this. And it, as you said, I think it goes hand in hand. It's like it's not a bad option for Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, for much of the Arab world, much of the African continent. It's not a bad option to come together and try to figure out something else, and not least because, well, the other option is actively harming you every step of the way. But
Not just militarily, but economically. I don't know. Did you see what Marco Rubio said the other day?
Right. I think it was something about he was admitting fear of this development, I believe, right?
Yeah, he basically said because Brazil sat down with China and said, "We're done with the dollar. We're going to do business in the yuan." And he's like, "Oh my God, the fourth largest economy. I mean, the largest economy in the southern hemisphere is decoupling from the dollar. We won't be able to sanction them anymore. We won't be able to exert our influence on them. They're going to function as a sovereign nation, and this is a terrible thing." Imagine. I mean, at least he was honest. I have to give him,
Yep.
straight up props for wow, what honesty. But then the spokesperson for the White House, I'll mispronounce her name, so I don't want to say it to insult her, but she basically was talking about this, and she said, "Those nations that seek to decouple the dollar, you are offending the American people, because the well-being of the American people depends on the ability of the dollar to be the supreme currency, the reserve currency, so that we can leverage this to enhance the da 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 da." And she doesn't even listen to what she's saying. She's basically saying that if a nation decides that they don't want to do business with the dollar, that that America will be compelled to intervene, because we have to have you do business with the dollar, because otherwise you're harming the economy of America, and that's an insult to the American people. The arrogance and the hubris. Look, I don't want the dollar to collapse. I don't know how about you, Danny, but I get paid in dollars, and and the dollars are what I take to the grocery store, and it sort of upsets me sometimes when the price of food goes up um, everywhere. I mean, we have a favorite diner that we go to every weekend for breakfast. Typical American diner, and they're they apologized. They came in and said we had to raise our prices, and I'm talking about not an insignificant raise, because the price of food has gone up. You see that if you go to restaurants, you go to the grocery store, it's there. The I want the dollar to be stable. I'd like the dollar to have value, because that way, when I earn $1,000, I can buy $1,000 worth of stuff. I don't want to earn $1,000 and only be able to buy $800 worth of stuff, or $600 worth of stuff, because you know what? Inflation is making the value of my dollar decrease, and my employer, by the way, it's not Russia. My employer is not giving me more money. It's not like my employer is going, "Oh gosh, look, the cost of living cost you 12.5% in the last year." Yeah, 12.5%. That's inflation and everything else. Some people say it's even higher. That means that instead of earning $100, I'm now earning, here we go with my military math, but it's going to be somewhere in the area of 87.5%, or 87.5 dollars. That ain't $100. So, and then next year, when you factor it in, it's going to be, around $70. That ain't $100, but I'm only, my pay hasn't been adjusted. I need the dollar to do well. I need the dollar to be strong, and it's not. It's failing. But that's not a international security issue. That's just the stupidity of American policy. Yeah, I tell you what, Marco Rubio and lady spokesperson of the White House, whose name I can't pronounce, stop stealing money. For instance, if you're going to call the dollar the world's reserve currency, and people are going to have faith in that, but then you go and you steal 700, $800 billion of Russian